The Quran has been teaching me a lot of cool things as I reflect on either the Quran or some philosophy or ideas about America, really, and the foundations of America. A couple things that I really wanted to note here. The Quran really seems to be pushing this idea of two things, really. Individual responsibility for yourself and how you live your life. That's one. And then two, speaking up against oppression. So I'll show you a couple places where this says this. This is in Surah Al-Baqarah. It's the first part. Give me 1 second. So for example, Surah Al-Baqarah, that's a Surah 2, verse 286. God does not burden a soul beyond what it can bear. Okay, what does that mean? That means that as an individual, you're a person here. You have your own individual soul. And God has placed you on this planet in a situation which you are created to bear. In other words, you are here, the environment pushes against you, but God has put you in this position for a reason. And I feel like even if that's not true, that should be true. Because what other kind of mental model should you have? Should you have a mental model be like, I'm not made up, I'm not cut out for this? Well, that's how you get into despair. But God is saying, hey, we have done this so you can be ready for this. That's really what it seems to me so far. Now, Surah Al-An'am says the same thing. Every soul earns not blame except for against itself. And no bearer of burdens will bear the burden of another. They won't bear the burden of another person. You are only accountable for yourself. Now, why is this so fascinating to me? Because this is the same thing which you'll find in the ideas of the American Revolution. So what is, for example, what does Thomas Jefferson say? Here, let me find it for you. So it's not Thomas Jefferson, I'm sorry, I found it. It's Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin says, those who would give up essential liberty, to purchase a little bit of temporary safety deserves neither liberty or safety. In other words, you have your liberty. You are an individual. Now, when you give up your liberty, where are you giving it to? You're giving it to somebody else. If you give up that liberty because they're promising you a little bit more safety, you have traded yourself. Isn't this the common theme that you see within the Quran? Let's go back to the Quran. So if we go back to the Quran, I'll pick a random one. You'll say Surah Az-Zumar. Oh, I'm saying that right, which is Surah 39, verse 70. And every soul will be fully compensated for what it did. And God is the most knowing of what you do. So you tell me, like, does this make sense in regards to like life, liberty, the pursuit of property, the pursuit of happiness, being an individual, and then being a stand-up person? So if you are the only person that's responsible for your soul, why do we worry so much about the souls of others and not of our own soul? It seems like the thing that irritates me the most about people is the same thing that seems to irritate God the most in people. And really what that is that people that like to preach, but not to practice. Why would you preach something and then not practice it? Probably because you want to show people that you're smarter than you feel. There's a weird thing about looking outward and trying to impress people, but all of it has to happen internally. It has to happen within your own soul. How many people want to look outside and want to show everybody how cool they are, how much they're praying, how fit they are, how doing this, doing this. But yet their own soul, do they forget about God and that God can see into their own soul? And even if God doesn't exist, like this argument, I'm always thinking, okay, well, is this real or is it not real? What I've noticed is even if it's fake, it's real. Now, what I mean is like, even if God is just an idea that lives in everybody's head, which I don't think it is, by the way. But even if it is, even if God is idea in everybody's head, thinking like, hey, God is watching you on how you behave, don't do corruption. It's a better mental model to live. God is watching me, so I gotta get up at 5 a.m. and say thank you for being here. That's a better model to live. And then I would ask, if that model is here, how did it get here, and how is that mental model so perfect? Now I want to outline one more thing from the Quran, which is really the story of David and Goliath. It's in the Bible, it's in the Quran. It's a really simple story. David was pretty sure he was a shepherd, and Goliath was a tyrant. And David had a slingshot and hit Goliath with it and killed Goliath with God's leave, as the Quran would say. Now, what is this story about? This is the story of standing up against oppression. Now, if you look at it from a biblical perspective, you'll see that Moses stood up against Pharaoh, stood up against oppression, which we can go into another video. If you look at the story of Muhammad with the Quraysh, he stood up against oppression. If you look at the story of the American Revolution and the British, the Americans stood up against oppression. So this idea of individual responsibility is built into us. And the prophets, whether it's Moses, David, Noah standing up for the truth, Abraham, Muhammad, Jesus, all of these people who are so-called sent by God were sent really on one mission. And that mission seems to be stand up for justice, always. Stand up for justice. Be responsible for what you do yourself. That's a fascinating message, isn't it? Yeah, cool. Thanks for listening, guys.